Good morning. It's 9 a.m. Monday, May 8th, 2023. This is the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First is to review the agenda.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next is public hearing on proposed amendments to the Title III of the Muscatine County Code of Ordinances to add a definition for local meat locker and/or butcher shop to Article 1, Section 3, and to add Section 3.32 local meat lockers and butcher shops as a special permitted use to Chapter 2, Article 3, A1, Agricultural District, Section 3, with accompanying requirements. So we are in a public hearing.
Okay. Yep, this is something that we've talked about for probably the last year, as the COVID-19 pandemic brought to everybody's attention, supply chain and some of the labor shortages, packing plants, accessing meats for foods was kind of an issue nationwide. There was some interest about that same time from some people locally about starting local meat lockers. We took a look at our ordinance, and we did not define local meat lockers or butcher shops any different than we did meat packing plants. And so as a result, all types of butcher shops or packing plants would be required to locate in an I-2 heavy industrial district. Realizing there was probably a better way of accommodating smaller local-based meat lockers and butcher shops, we took a look at the ordinance. I took the matter to the zoning commission. I talked to other counties, looked at some of the impacts to our county, and so on March 10th, the zoning commission held a public hearing to discuss the matter with my recommendations, and they did actually the following month then make a recommendation to adopt the provisions that are in front of you. Just for a matter of the record, we are proposing to define, and this definition was approved by the zoning commission, local meat lockers and/or butcher shops are a facility or premises that by nature of size and scope is intended to serve a local or regional customer base in the slaughter, processing, and packaging of livestock, fowl, or wild game for human consumption. So that's the definition that the zoning commission is recommending. And then we are recommending that we implement local meat lockers or butcher shops as a special permitted use in the A1 district, realizing that there's probably places in the county that could accommodate these smaller scale butcher shops without adverse effect to surrounding properties. So a lot of things we looked at were like separation distances to avoid conflict with neighboring properties, impact to the environment, impact to our county roads, that type of thing. So the zoning commission is recommending a minimum separation distance of 1,250 feet from any occupied structure not owned and occupied by the facility operator. So if they lived on site, their house could be closer to the butcher shop. And with a separation distance of less than 750 feet shall be denied. So recommended 1,250, but at bare minimum 750 feet from anybody else's occupiable structure. One of the items that I had recommended to the zoning commission on a strong recommendation of the county engineer was that local meat lockers and butcher shops may be allowed, provided the proposed location has frontage and adequate access to a fully paved county or state roadway. The zoning commission didn't feel that that was necessary. I still feel that it is, and the county engineer, that would be his preference, that these are located with frontage along paved roads, simply because these types of facilities are going to generate a fair amount of traffic. Rendering trucks, garbage trucks are heavy. Yes, our county roads do get heavy truck traffic from farm, but agriculture is something that we have little control over, and there could be fairly not super heavy traffic counts, but just to avoid the impact on our bridges, our seal coat roads, our gravel roads. Myself and the county engineer are recommending that these be limited to sites with frontage to fully paved county or state roads. We did the same thing when we approved satellite LP storage, where we have some of these bulk tanks located out throughout the county. We require those to be located off of paved roads for the same reason. That's obviously something that is part of your consideration. You can add in or leave it at the recommendation of the zoning commission, which is to not limit them to paved road frontage. The way we're handling the size and scope of these, the recommendation was to allow these local butcher shops to process no more than 30 animal units. I came up with an animal unit calculation, much like they do for manure management plans, and that would limit the number of animals being slaughtered so that we don't have to worry about someone actually starting a full-scale meat packing plant in one of these. So they'd be limited to 30 animal units per week. To give you an example, that would be up to 30 cattle or bison, because cattle or bison would be one animal unit per head, which is quite a few. I talked to local locker operators, and none of them are running 30 cattle a week in our area. That would be a lot. Most of it is storage space when you're hanging the meat to dry age. Swine is 0.4 animal units, sheep is 0.1, and then fowl is considerably less. So that we think would accommodate pretty much any of the local or regional needs for butchering of these different types of animals, and give us some limits so it doesn't become a full industrial packing plant. They would also be required to maintain and display on their premise proof of applicable licensure and inspection from Iowa Department of Land Stewardship or the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You can license your facility either way. You can get USDA or IDAL's licensure, depending on what types of services you want, whether you have meat that can be sold at retail or just custom butchering. There's several different options that people can do. That's all done through state or federal licensure and inspection. We have requirements for solid waste, wastewater, and animal byproducts. They have to be contained and disposed in accordance with applicable federal, state, and local regulations. Solid waste, wastewater, and byproducts shall be stored in sealed containers or within a building so as to contain objectionable sights and smells and prevent the attraction of vermin and scavengers. We require that they have adequate parking and vehicle turnaround area on the premises so that a truck and trailer does not have to stop and back off of a county roadway. So much like the hog confinements, that's part of the requirement in the master matrix process to deal with traffic issue. That'd be part of the special use permit application. They have to submit a site plan that just shows us how they accommodate vehicular traffic and turnaround. And then they also recommended animal staging areas shall be constructed or shielded in a manner that does not allow for the viewing of animals being staged or slaughtered from the public roadway. So they would put the holding pens behind the facility or behind some sort of screening fence so the public isn't complaining about seeing animals lined up for slaughter. And then the staging, yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you were paused. I'm just wondering, do you think the 750 minimum foot setback is enough to basically not require shielding from neighboring properties for viewing purposes?
I suppose it would depend on the topography. You know,
Yeah.
750 feet, if the land's dead flat, a neighboring property might still, be visible, including a staging area, depending on where a neighbor. That could be something that if there was a neighbor, that close that could see, the Board of Adjustment could require that additional as part of special. They're allowed to attach reasonable conditions and stipulations, but that's certainly something that we could add. Just
Well, as long as there's a mechanism for addressing it.
there would be if there was a neighbor that came and addressed some concern. I don't want to look at it. The Board of Adjustment could attach a condition or stipulation like that
Sounds good.
to benefit a neighbor. And then finally, the staging area should be constructed in a manner with materials that completely contain all manure. So, basically if they'd have to put concrete curbs around it, or some way of containing that manure runoff isn't happening from their staging areas. So that's kind of a summary of the requirements. It would be a special use permit in the A1 district that would allow a case-by-case review, just like any other special use permit by the Board of Adjustment, but would give us a mechanism to allow local meat lockers in areas other than I-2 heavy industrial.
I have a couple of questions, Eric.
Yep.
Mostly around retail. We've had situations in the past where, retail consumption at site, so that would not be allowed in this ordinance. Are we addressing that?
Well, retail consumption on site would require a restaurant licensure, and I think that when we look at our zoning, you're allowed to have only one primary use. And I'm not sure that the IDALs or USDA would permit, I suppose with adequate separation, you could have a restaurant and a butcher shop, but we're only permitting butcher shops with this, not restaurants.
Okay, and then, the other thing is I just think about, permitted use in an A1, a special permitted use, and then, retail traffic, it'd be my concern is, you know, a mechanism to address that. You don't want a lot of necessarily, and just as long as it can handle it. So it doesn't feel like spot zoning to me, you know, kind of.
Is there some residents out there that we are aware of waiting for this policy to come to fruit so they can, start these?
We had started looking at it, after, and Mr. Vasquez is here. He had actually, applied to rezone part of his property, cause he does some custom butchering on the outskirts of West Liberty. However, his property was not ideal to rezone to I-2 heavy industrial. So that really kinda got us thinking about what could we do to accommodate some, you know, these types of operations. And then, Mr. Winters that has the bison farm up on 61 came to me several months ago and was asked what does it take to open a butcher shop, because he's having trouble finding places to butcher the bison that he produces, and is shipping them sometimes all the way to Colorado. And so he's interested, and so it was time to take this matter to the zoning commission.
So the two you referenced are already on hard surface roads?
Well, Mr. Vasquez is actually,
Access through the city, correct?
part of it is right next to the city, and his wouldn't meet the separation distance, so this isn't gonna necessarily help his current situation. He's operating under a very small scale home occupation right now, which you can do, but he's very limited in size. But this would give him, if he would choose to grow bigger, the opportunity to find a site that's not full scale heavy industrial and expand his operation.
I was just wondering if we didn't allow it to be on our gravel roads, how much we might hinder others from maybe having the same opportunity.
Well, it's going to limit, certainly, but my position in that of the engineer is that there is still a lot of available, space out there in the county that has frontage to paved roads, and I think, you know, we all know the issues with the cost of maintaining roads and bridges and the impacts of equipment getting heavier and heavier, and so you can take the recommendation of the zoning commission if you want and not require them to be paved. I think there's a lot of places, I mean, just because I want to, open an operation of a certain type doesn't mean my property is ideally suited for it, unfortunately.
I guess I was thinking of some of these smaller places, maybe somebody already having their home or kind of facility where they wouldn't be building a new location, maybe it'd be at their farm or something like that, so I didn't.
Nobody has come to me expressing interest, specifically on a piece of ground yet that is not on a paved road.
Okay.
And that's not the reason we went that route, just to
Right.
accommodate Mr.
Right.
Winters at all, it's just, this is based on protection of infrastructure.
I think the concern, you know, I'd see Danny and I think Eric and Brian are probably talking about is, you know, we've seen that as these, you know, confinement operations have expanded throughout the counties. And, you know, when ag properties, you know, a grain farmer can kind of pick time of day when he travels on a road and kind of manage that spring thaw and turn, you know, sometimes when you have livestock, when it's gotta go, it's gotta go. And I think we have to think about that as we move forward with these allowed uses. Because it does put a pretty heavy toll on our roads and can be a challenge to maintain. Now, everybody's been pretty good about it because they have to live with the roads too, but at some point, you know, you gotta get feed in, you gotta get animals in and out. And if you don't have conducive conditions, it can cause a problem. So I think I support, you know, and I would say, do we have the ability to put a mechanism in there if there's a hardship or something, I mean, I don't wanna restrict people's ability to use their land to do that, that's not the intent.
So
The intent is to protect the
what you're
roads.
talking about would first entail going to the Board of Adjustment and requesting a variance from those requirements. And to be granted a variance, the person would have to be able to show a demonstrable hardship, that they're being denied reasonable return on their investment on their land. Well, if it's a piece of farm ground, they have return. It doesn't mean that we ought, just as a matter of convenience, financial hardship alone is not a hardship according to the courts for variances. And so just because I don't own any property along a paved road, I don't know that it would rise to the level of proving a hardship to achieve a variance, which would be necessary to get around that part of the provision.
Your point is well taken, and I would agree that, number one, there is a need in the community for the more locker operations. There's no question about that. Myself, I'm in favor of really taking a hard look at having hard surface roads. When you think of now granted, when this livestock is hauled to these facilities, generally speaking, it's a morning drop-off. So, to your point, Jeff, the amount of livestock trailer traffic that will be on an early morning situation. But I don't know if people realize, you're looking at a maximum of 30 animal units. There's gonna be a fair amount of traffic weekly going to this location. It's more than you realize, and a lot of people realize, especially with the other larger trucks and vendors and so on and so forth that will service this operation. So I think we really need to take a good look at that on the location because there'll be a lot of traffic in a month's time or a year's time going in and out of a facility like that, of which the community needs badly. If you've ever tried to get a locker date, you'd understand it, right?
They're 12 to 16 months out.
Right.
For like
So
butchering fees.
I don't want to hinder this type of business, but I also at the same time would be in favor of certainly in favor of hard surface road on that particular position.
Is it possible to have the ordinance stating hard surface roads, but then if somebody requests one of these off of a secondary road, that there could be a variance or a process for us to see about approving it?
Well, that's the variance process that I just explained.
That's the variance
It would
process.
request a variance, and the question would be, what is the hardship? Just because
I don't understand the hardship. There has to be a hardship to request a variance?
there has to be something unique about the property that makes the application of the county zoning regulations unreasonable. You have to be able to articulate and prove that the regulations deny you of a reasonable return on your investment on the land. And then there's a lot of other things you have to protect public interest, protect environment concerns, protect surrounding property values. So there's the hardship component that you have to prove, and then the protection of public interest that you have to prove to achieve a variance.
And typically, I think we've seen them, and correct me if I'm wrong, like houses up on, on the top of the Burlington Hill, or the Burlington Road Hill, where they might put in a garage that doesn't have the minimum setbacks because the land drops off so fast. Is that?
Right, yeah,
anything like
by
that?
far, the most common variances that we see are for building setbacks. Maybe it's steep slopes, they're a unique shape of the parcel that can't accommodate the established setbacks. Land use variances are much more difficult to achieve because oftentimes you can't really prove that just because you want to run a motorcycle repair shop, that's not a hardship, or just because my neighbor might have property that can accommodate and I don't, that doesn't mean that there's something unreasonable about our zoning ordinance, or that I'm, like I said, if it's piece farm ground and you're farming it, you are getting a return. Not everybody's property is gonna get the same return on investment, based on with zoning. So I think it would be difficult to apply variances. If you're not inclined to require the paved roads, then don't require the paved roads. I think it's putting the Board of Adjustment in a very difficult position to try to, weigh whether there's a true hardship.
And you said the Board of Adjustment, you and Brian brought that issue to the Board of Adjustment, and they chose not to include it in their recommended ordinance.
They did.
Not to have the hard surface roads?
Not to have the hard surface road as a requirement.
Well, I agree with Scott on the amount of traffic, but the weight on those trailers, you're bringing maybe one beef, one pig, maybe two pigs to a locker to be butchered, versus what you're saying out in the hog buildings or out in the countryside, you're bringing in and out semi-loads, which
Yep.
really put more wear and tear on our roads than a trailer with one or two. Yes, I understand the amount of traffic, but a gravel road that it's a short section or something, you're not probably gonna tear it up with a trailer with a single on it, I understand.
Yeah, I
The
would
dust-
think,
dust could be a
small
problem.
quantity deliveries.
Yeah.
But I don't know rendering trucks, how big those
They're not gonna
are.
haul,
The rendering trucks are gonna be like your modern garbage trucks.
Right.
And they're over them, they're over the embargo limits sometimes on
So
sealed roads.
15 ton, probably 20
Yeah.
ton.
probably.
you know? So I think that was our concern is one of you guys kind of mentioned, agriculture, they kind of have a little bit of a window, they can plan. If we have roads embargoed in the spring for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you've got a beef appointment set up 12, 14, 16 months in advance, well, that rendering truck's gotta keep going and servicing those areas, the customer base, you know, when the roads get soft, even the gravel roads get soft, frost boils in the spring. 30 animal units, that's 30 head of beef. A lot of beef is sold by quarter and half, so talk potential customer traffic of 60 to 90 cars, you know, per week just for the beef.
And that's what I was speaking to mainly, was the volume of traffic that will be evident from that 30 animal units will be X as a multiplier higher. I'm just talking the actual amount of traffic that is built into that road.
Yeah, it's not insignificant.
It's not
On a lot of
insignificant,
road- on a
but
lot
it's
of roads,
not,
it would be
but
significant.
to Kurt's point, it's not heavy loads. The heaviest loads are gonna be the trash trucks and the rendering
Right,
trucks. That's gonna
right.
be the heaviest loads. You know, you may run a gooseneck that you're hauling, 3 or 4 head of beef in at a time. That's a possibility. More often than not, it's one, just as you say. But there again, the load is not significant in weight. It's the volume of traffic that this is gonna be increased. It's not gonna be, you say a maximum of 30, that doesn't mean there's gonna be 30 people coming to pick up processed. It's gonna be times X, and that X could be, well over 100.
Yeah.
Well over 100. It's just a point, that's all.
Are there any current, like, grandfathered existing uses that would be affected by this, or is every meat locker in an I-1 already?
We only have one that I would consider local butcher shop, and it's in the city of West Liberty.
Yeah, and that's I-1.
I don't, now, are there people that do a little custom butchering out of their home, under home occupation? Possibly.
Sure.
You know, but that doesn't change.
Like, yeah, I guess I'm worried about if there's somebody who's already grandfathered in, but they
Well,
make
and
an
that would be a
alteration.
non-conforming use. They
Yeah.
would, you know, they would, in my
What about the
understanding-
one up on 61?
Steve Meats.
Steve's.
I don't really know what he's even really doing. There was some court cases with that where he did, challenge the county's ruling. I wasn't here at the time and was able to continue operation. If he does, I believe he's legal if he is because of that court case. I'd have to go back and research that, but whatever we do today would not affect an existing non-conforming use as long as that non-conforming use continues their operation, without pause. Once you pause a non-conforming use for 12 months or more, you cannot reestablish it.
I think that's zone C1, but I'm not sure exactly which piece of property it is. Just looking at it here.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. Any other discussion? Do I have anyone from the public that wishes to speak for or against?
I would make a motion to close the public hearing then.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. This is a roll call vote. Jeff?
Aye.
Nathan?
Aye.
I vote aye. Danny?
Aye.
Kurt?
Aye.
Public meeting is closed. Next is discussion and possible action to approve an ordinance amending Title III of the Muscatine County Code of Ordinances to add a definition for local meat locker and/or butcher shop to Article 1, Section 3, and to add Section 3.32, local meat lockers and butcher shops, as a special permitted use to Chapter 2, Article 3, A1, Agricultural District, Section 3, with accompanying requirements on the first of 3 readings.
Eric, on this one, if we wanted to ask the zoning commission to consider adding, frontage unpaved or roadways, would we do that at this point? Would we
Well,
land that back
I
or do
did.
we?
That was in my recommended language with urging from the county engineer. If you'll see at this sheet, they actually struck that section.
But
Okay.
you guys have the ability to add it if you
Yeah.
want to.
So we don't have to remand back to them, we can restore sections.
On something like that, you have final say, you can add any additional requirements, take some out. The overall premise is still the same.
But this is the first reading of the ordinance, so if you're interested in including that language, now's the time to.
I would be interested in including
I would, on the first reading, I would include that, and then see if we get feedback from interested parties, if you know people that are, to see, you know, if, I'm kinda on the fence
I
on
am
it a
too.
little bit.
I am too.
I don't, you know, I know we have issues on roads and I wanna be respectful of that. And I don't operate one of these, never have, don't intend to, so I don't understand if, you know, the whole embargo situation is something that can be worked around, you know, can you put smaller rendering trucks, can they, you know, cause that's my concern is the traffic on the roads and our ability to manage that.
So if we add that back in now, that it has to be hard surface
We have three
roads,
readings
we
to
got
go
3
through.
meetings, if we get public input, we can reconsider it.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct?
So in that case, I'd make the motion to approve on the first reading the ordinance with that frontage language added back in.
Local meat lockers and butcher shops may be allowed provided the proposed location has frontage and adequate access to fully paved county or state roadways.
Bingo.
And I will second that.
So I got a motion by Nathan, a second by Jeff. This is a roll call vote. Jeff?
Aye.
Nathan?
Aye.
I vote aye. Danny?
Aye.
And Kurt?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. Next is discussion and possible action to approve a new 5-day application for a Class C liquor license and outdoor service permit for Back Pocket Brewing LLC, 1788 Highway 22, Nichols, Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez.
And everything is in order, we've had a,
I believe this one is for a temporary, beer stop along for Ragbri.
Oh, okay.
That goes to the auditor's office, they sent it to me to take a look at it, we don't currently have any kind of Ragbri permitting or licensure. We've wrestled with that in the past and declined to implement any kind of local, they did submit, I think as part of their licensure, they have to submit plans to show their fencing, their tent location, their porta potties.
And they should have.
So when it says 5-day
No, I
application,
don't
that's
put those
referring
in
to
the
the
back.
duration of the permit?
Yeah, got it, it's probably the minimum, I'm guessing, that.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Motion by Nathan, second by Kurt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the May 1, 2023 regular meeting.
so move.
Second.
I got a motion by Jeff, second by Danny. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Correspondence. Jeff, you have anything?
Yeah, well, on the, May 4th, I attended the levy stakeholder meeting. And then I just, FYI, I did submit a letter or a comment to their whatever, and I encourage everyone to do that in support of that. Also, I had 6 voicemails on my machine at home, all of residents supporting the board to move for controlled intersections in all roads in the county, so that was it.
Okay. Nathan?
I saw the levy stakeholder meeting. I'm not sure the exact number. Not sure I was able to get back to all of the folks who texted or messaged or emailed, but tried to, all of in support of the stop signs.
Okay. I as well attended the levy stakeholder on the 4th, and I received, I believe, 7 calls on the uncontrolled intersections. That's all I had. Danny?
I had 5 or 6 calls on those intersections also. That was all I had.
Okay. Kurt?
Yeah, same. I did the levy stakeholder meeting on Thursday. Received about 8 calls on the uncontrolled intersection, and also received a call on a zoning issue that was coming up that I talked to Eric about, and Eric handled it.
Oh, I also think Jeff forwarded us an email from Dwayne Reese regarding cemetery in Arona Township.
Oh, yeah, and auditor's office gave me contacts, I forwarded on to him, and,
I forgot to mention I was at that
Trustees.
levies meetings also.
yeah, the trustees are responsible for that, and he's thanked us for the input, information, and moved on, so,
Okay.
yeah, I forgot about that, sorry.
Committee reports? Everything, Jeff?
No committees last week.
Nathan?
Let me see.
No.
I don't believe so. No.
No. I had none. Danny?
Wednesday, 5/3, I went to that groundbreaking for MPW out to Geneva for the new services they're providing to the county. I believe that's for fiber out that way. And then on 5/5, Mississippi Valley biweekly office hours, and in that meeting, I've kind of been keeping you guys a little updated is on how the new structure is gonna be with that western, pretty much the whole western side of the state, leaving that, workforce development and accepting Title I funds. So essentially, the governor is gonna be the chief CEO for all of that area, and the state will, sounds like the local areas will still provide those services under the direction of the state.
So Iowa Workforce Development offices will be responsible and tasked with those roles.
That's correct. Sounds like the services will still be provided locally, but it'll be under the direction of the governor's office. To their knowledge, the rest are five other areas, pretty much from central Iowa to east. They're all gonna continue at this time under the structure we're on, that we're doing now. To allocate the funds.
I wonder, because, if you think about, and I haven't kept track completely of the spend, but if you look at the overhead that the region has added since the transition to this new system, was, so you got Miranda, somebody, there's like three
Three
people?
That's about 215,000.
about $215,000 a year in overhead staff. And so in my mind, that's $215,000 in direct service that we're not providing to unemployed residents or retraining or whatever it might be. But the question, what I don't know, because the way the system used to operate, the community colleges did that work. And so I believe they received that funding, and I don't know how many service dollars, if it's a apples to apples comparison. That might be something interesting to understand, because, maybe it's, because we have, as the county, we have responsibility now, because we're on that board.
The biggest concern is the liability that can come back on the CEO, the board, our county, if funds are not spent appropriate, and they'll come back after us, and then it is in our bylaws that will be split between the 8 counties, and normally it's not a significant amount of money, but it could be.
Yeah.
And that was some of the pushbacks from the counties that left, because they was concerned that, of that liability, and the funds they brought into their areas just wasn't feasible.
Cause we have, our 8 county region has like the highest.
We're still the highest at 3.2 million, and then the second one in the state is like 2.5 million, about $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million less than what we get. So, I mean,
So we're paying $215,000 to administer, and that's not even all the administration, that's just the oversight spend, right? Because we're also paying additional funds for somebody to process all the paperwork, right? Cause that was that contract that originally was with, is it the judicial or somebody's doing?
Southeast Iowa, something, no.
Well, the Regional Planning Commission used to do it.
That's not
And that was
who's
like
doing
a $70,000 contract too, so let's just say we're paying 300,000 on 3 million. So we're losing 10% to overhead. So it just seems like a high number to me, I don't know.
well, it is, but,
Cause the state's spending the money too, that's the question is.
Yeah.
Cause I know that Michelle McNertney and her whole group, right? They were created to manage this, so I'm sure they're not working for free.
I think there's some other supervisors in our district that aren't crazy about continuing. I know Jim Irwin is, that they're working on grants right now and some other funding, and he doesn't wanna see us walk away from that, and maybe we shouldn't, but there's a lot I'm still learning on all this to understand how valuable it is to our area.
Well, I don't know, what's our unemployment rate in the region running, Danny, 2.5?
Ours, I think in our district, some of them counties that left were in the 2 range. I think ours is still over 3 in the southeast part, 3, 4, or something like that.
And I think the problem is, we're still operating on an antiquated model that is trying to find jobs for workers. It needs to be predicated on finding workers for jobs. That's not the problem. We're trying to solve a 20-year-old problem with, a 30-year-old solution, and I'd rather see reduce all the inefficiencies we can.
Yeah, that's the challenge I see is, from what I see on the street is, if you want work, you can get work today,
Yeah.
if you truly want it. I mean, there's.
Part of me,
there's really no
part of me
issue.
thinks that the trend might continue with some of these other areas, but they do get significant more funding, so maybe not, I don't know, but
Okay.
that's all.
Interesting.
That's all you had?
That's all that's got.
Kirk, any committees?
No, I had none.
None? Okay. Next is items with the administration office. First is discussion and possible decision regarding uncontrolled intersections in Muscatine County. And with that, I'd like to speak on that. At a previous board meeting, County Engineer Brian Horowski gave the board his professional opinion from the research he had done in regard to the rural uncontrolled intersections. Brian felt the intersections should stay as they currently are. In 2005, an Iowa State University study showed that there is no statistical difference in the safety performance of ultra-low volume stop-controlled and uncontrolled intersections. In non-engineering terms, that means the study found installing stop signs on lesser traveled roads did not improve safety. Overregulating traffic can result in drivers ignoring critical signage where it is essential, leading to the possibility of more crashes. Installing many non-essential signs can lead to a less safe system overall, providing a false sense of security with drivers not stopping or recognizing the potential for conflict at the intersection. With this information and professional opinion, I'm in favor of leaving the rural uncontrolled intersection as they currently are, so long as the current right-of-way rule stays in place. That's my position.
Yeah, I've thought about this and I'm kinda going back to, I listened to all the sides, I'd love to be able to support something, but, I'm a process person. And we have an engineer and we have professionals that do this, so, I would be, I don't know what it would say. I like the fact that we have a process, that we go by the Uniform Code of Traffic Enforcement, or whatever that book that Brian mentioned is, and so what I would prefer to see is if we believe that there's an issue with that book, that we go to the source of that book or to that book, and, I'm always willing to do that, and talk with the DOT or the legislature and say, we believe that's errant and there should be something, because I wanna see consistency. That's what I wanna see. I don't wanna see one thing here and one thing there, and I don't have a problem one way or another with it. I wanna make sure that we have a process in place that, so whenever, any time a road is dealt with, we have this is what we do, this is the process we go through. That's kinda my challenge with the whole thing. I don't wanna micromanage an engineer. I don't wanna micromanage a county attorney, a sheriff, that's not what I do. But I wanna make sure that we have a process in place that manages these items. So that's kinda where I'm at. I would have to see something incorporated into that handbook that we utilize to do this for me to be supportive of it. I don't wanna unilaterally say I want to do something because I don't know what to do. That's not my area of expertise.
Good.
Go ahead, Nathan.
No.
My biggest concern is the 14 four-way intersections. I know Jim had mentioned last week about treating them all the same, and the way I understood what Brian said, we don't currently have a policy, and right now we're not treating them the same, because many of all the other four-way intersections do have stop signs. 14 don't. I don't know if any of our current three-way have stop signs and others don't. So to me, there's not really a policy in place, and it's kind of not all treated equally across the board already. I'd have less concerns with the three-ways. I'd hate to spend the money on the three-ways, which would be an additional, if my figures are accurate, around $40,000 because I think everybody on a three-way, that single direction typically is slowing down and turning left or right. He doesn't have any other choice, he can't go straight. And I find it less likely to have a situation there. Now, on the other 14, if we implemented a policy in all four-way intersections had stop signs, then we're looking at just adding stop signs to 14 intersections, 2 each way with the stop ahead in the tune of about only $10,000. I would like to see the four ways protected, and get to that point is what I would hope to see.
I guess I disagree a little bit there with you on just the four ways. I think what Jim said, if we don't do them all, how do you pick where you do them? If you have an accident at a sign, or an intersection we do not sign, then who's liable? That's what, I think you have to do them all if you're gonna do any of them. I don't think you can pick and choose where you wanna do them. If you're gonna do it, we gotta do them all. Brian's studies and everything, and none of the other counties having any policies, but the thing that kinda stuck out to me at the bottom of the page, the sheet that he had, that in 2015, 52 of the 88 people killed at intersections in Iowa were killed at rural intersections. That kinda stuck with me, bothered me a little bit, that, and that's the state of Iowa. So you put that over 99 counties, you had less than one. But if you can prevent one in the county, or, save a life, save what this family's going through, and it happens, it probably cycles. Once every 3-4 years, we have a accident like this. But that's the one that kind of stuck out to me, was at the bottom of the sheet that Brian handed out to us.
So for me, this policy, or this movement, came to us on an emotional basis, and very validly so. It was a terrible accident. We've had a lot of very moving discussion and information given to us. The folks who've contacted us to support it, at least in my experience, by and large, have been connected in some way with the families of those individuals involved, and my heart goes out to them. I don't like using emotion as a basis for making policy. I think it results in bad policy. I don't think putting a stop sign, well, I shouldn't say this. Looking at the odds and the information we've been given, putting up stop signs at every single uncontrolled intersection in the county is unlikely to save a single life in the next 20 years. That being said, I think Kurt's point is valid in that the risk versus the cost suggests to me that we take a look at these most dangerous intersections. That I'm not qualified to say whether we should do all or some, or decide which ones are the most dangerous. But like Jeff, I think we have to have a clear, articulated policy so that anybody can pull up our code or whatever it is, the direction on our website, and say, okay, according to this, streets A and B should have a stop sign there, and lo and behold, they do. Before I can vote for anything, I need to see. I don't know what I'm voting on at this point. If there is an action item, is the action item that there should be stop signs at every intersection? If so, when? If so, what? And if not every, what the factors should influence? So I don't know what I'm voting on. I would need to see a clear, comprehensive policy, and whether that's laid out in the handbook that Jeff and Brian had mentioned, whether that's laid out in a policy adopted and directed to the county engineer, I don't know. So I'm for the stop signs. I don't think they will improve safety, but I think the risk is great enough and the cost low enough that if we have a solid, concrete proposal that tells me exactly what we're doing, then I'm happy to vote for it. But right now, I don't know what that proposal is. And I understand Brian's not here today, and unfortunately due to circumstances, and can't comment on that, but.
I think Brian's stance is to leave them, like Scott mentioned, leave
I
them the same.
understand. But if there were gonna be a policy developed, he would have to be, in my mind, part of it. We could certainly direct him to create a policy or a rubric under which this is dealt with.
Because I believe what he said they do today, if I'm not mistaken, was he said they use this book, this handbook published by the Iowa DOT, this uniform traffic control handbook, and that's what they utilize. I've not read it, I probably don't intend to read it, to know how it defines or how it determines whether they should put signs there or not. And, you know, I don't think that, I like the, you know, I don't know if we have a stated policy. I didn't get that from
No.
Brian. I got from Brian that this is what they've always done. It's kind of history. And so, you know, maybe what we should ask the engineer's office to do is state our policy for that. And then, you know, if you state your policy, we could ask him to take a look at how you decide if you do or do not sign an intersection. Because that's what I would like to see, is just pretty clear that says this is this, you know, is if I have more than 5 cars a day, I do. If I have less than, I don't, and I'm gonna do a traffic study. How do I determine whether I do this or I don't do this? Cause since we've had this conversation, I've been paying a lot more attention to that than I do. And uncontrolled intersections are all over the place. We drive them in cities, we drive them in the rural community, we drive them everywhere. And I wasn't really aware that they were that prevalent.
I wasn't either. I mean, I think the difference you'll see between an uncontrolled intersection in the city compared to the rural areas, you're gonna be significantly less speed most often. Because in the county, the gravel road speed limit is 55, and there's nothing like that in the city. You know, you might be looking at 25-mile-an-hour speed limits. So, not that there couldn't be an accident, but the risk would be a lot less than an accident that would happen going 55 mile an hour.
Yeah, I did read, we did, and I should note that we did get a list of signatures today to support this, of about 100 signatures throughout the county, which I appreciate that, but, if I took my double-edged sword, they'd said, 45, I'd said, well, let's just do a universal deal and say the speed limit on county roads is 35 now. We don't post them anyway. What's the difference? And now it's done. So that's why I like a process. I like where is it written? How do we do it? And what's our policy? And then let's just stick with our policy. Debate the policy and get the policy right, and then move forward.
Well, there is nothing from the state that addresses uncontrolled intersections, correct?
There's, the manual gives you directives on what you should consider. I think the nutshell of what I took from what Brian had to say is there were 8 accidents at uncontrolled intersections in the last 5 years at 8 different intersections. So if you have an intersection that has multiple accidents at it, that's gonna be a trigger within the manual that would then cause you to take a look at it. The manual would talk about sight distances, if distances are blocked, that sort of a
Traffic
thing
counts.
that would impact traffic flow, then you might sign that. So my guess is the intersections that have stop signs in the county that are previously uncontrolled have had something occur more than once, or have some sight distance issue that's caused them to go ahead and do it as it's, at whatever point in time they did it. So, I think the policy's there. The question is, do we just deviate from the policy despite it for this reason? I mean, that's really what we're asking ourselves. And again, that's your decision as to whether or not you do it. From a liability standpoint, I'm always interested in a consistent applied approach across the board.
So-
And it's not somebody saying you should have done it, you did it there and you didn't do it here.
So Jim, let's say we did deviate from it and we put stop signs at half the uncontrolled intersections without specifying clearly in code or policy what goes where and why and when. Are we opening ourselves up to liability if an accident occurs at a non-controlled intersection?
That was my point last week,
Yeah.
about either doing it or not doing it.
Right.
Because I think once you pick winners and losers, for somebody on the board always said that, I think you're picking winners and losers, and then you're gonna say, well, you did this 4-way, you didn't do this 3-way, it's no different, and you should have, and now the county's gonna potentially be involved. Is that highly likely? No, I don't necessarily think it's highly likely, but there's a lot of motivated people out there. And just being drug into it's being drug into it. So my perspective is always apply a uniform policy across the board, and you don't deviate from it unless that policy tells you you should, because at the end of the day, that's the most solid foundation you can make your choice on. That doesn't mean anything other than that. You know, the board can certainly do what it wants.
For me, I've taken everybody's opinion into consideration, whether that's in this room or from the community. And I would like to make a motion to have all of our intersections controlled.
At the end of the day, what needs to be done is for the drivers of the motor vehicles to obviously drive more defensively and follow the right-of-way law. And the only thing that raises the risk at any intersection, every intersection will have a different mathematical calculation of risk, simply because of the amount of vehicles that goes through that intersection. It's all relative, because the amount of distracted drivers is catastrophic. And since last Monday's meeting, I was at a four-way stop on major rural roads, hard surface. I came to a complete stop. I was coming from the north going south, came to a complete stop. Vehicle coming from the east, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:30. So sun wasn't a factor in the eyes of the driver at all. And that particular driver, obviously, I'm gonna wait until that driver commits to stop. Well, that driver never committed to stop. Blew that stop sign that I was driving defensively on. And, I mean, that's one example that happened to me personally just from last week's meeting.
All right. Well, we're not ever gonna be able to control the distractedness of all of our drivers out there with
Correct.
everything going on, cell phones.
No,
That's not gonna go away, but,
It won't, but that's the solution to the problem.
well, it is. Yeah, if we weren't distracted, there'd be a lot less accidents, but.
For sure.
Anyway, that would be my motion, if anybody's entertaining for a second. If not, that's where I'm at on it.
Maybe can I ask if there's any other greater specificity to your motion in terms of time, order?
I'd be so I'd be open to finding out, this, I think we could do this over a couple year period, whatever might be appropriate for Brian to do this. I think we should start with the four ways, but to get those done first, and then we gotta figure out, let's say we started with the four ways this year, and we needed to come up, and we completed them this year. We need to come up with roughly $10,800, $11,000. We've got that Heritage Fund, we've got some ARPA, entrance money that's left, maybe that could cover that 11 grand. And then we could incorporate over the next couple years into Brian's budget to whittle away at maybe wrapping this up in a 2 or 3 year period.
Sure, and I know I'd be putting you on the spot to do this right now, but I guess I'd like to see that all fleshed out in the text or the actual language of the
Right.
motion, so I know exactly what I'm voting for or against.
Okay.
Would 5 years be reasonable to get it done in? 3, I mean,
I have no idea.
well, I don't need,
I don't know, I wanna see
Yeah.
a specific thing that I'm voting for before
I get you. I
Understand.
got you.
So if you wanna take a minute and characterize that, and I wouldn't say, I'm not gonna commit to voting for it one way or the other till I hear it.
Right, I got you.
But maybe you put that together now, maybe we put that together and come back at it next week, I don't know.
If you want me to put that together for my motion, I'll put that together, and maybe we can, we'll put it back on next week, and I'll have that laid out.
Sure, again, I'm not committing one way or the other on it.
Oh, I got it.
Okay, I don't wanna make it seem like I'm stringing anybody along.
well, yeah, I'm the same thing. I'd like to see how many years we're gonna do it into, Nathan. We're just, if we lay it out there that we're gonna do it, how soon are we gonna get it done?
And I'm
We need
open-
to have some kind of closure on it. We gotta be done with it. And
Right.
The other thing I would like to see is if, maybe we talk with Brian a little bit, is in the process of, if you craft this, whatever, let's talk about adopting a formal policy in the engineer's office on how we're dealing with intersections.
Right.
I don't think it should be a board policy, I think it should be the engineer's policy in the engineer's office.
Well,
And
if the,
we should have something in writing so people can look at it and say, this is what this county's gonna do.
and to me, if that policy should, if we do get a motion passed that we control all intersections, the policy should be fairly easy to write. Muscatine County, you know, we control all intersections. It doesn't have to be a cherry pick
Well, I
here
think,
and
I think,
there.
I think you're, you know, if you say, if your policy says that you use the uniform book of codes, then that's probably what we're doing today. So your policy may conflict.
we
That's
have
what
a
I'm saying is that you gotta think about, yeah, what you want to achieve and how your policy needs to be stated so that you achieve what you wanna achieve. And then that, so that
Right.
the average person could look at that and say, okay, this is what they're doing, because you know, just, I don't think we've ever stated that that's our policy, but I think that's been the practice of the engineer's offices, and it sounds like the engineer's office in every county in Iowa, and it appears that we have a pretty, one would say that you don't really have a process because it's inconsistent in the state of Iowa, sounds like. I mean, Washington County has none, other counties have some, you know, so I think there's so that tells me that you have a weak policy, because you're not adhering to it consistently, probably. How does one county apply it significantly different than another county? It's a weak policy. And I think that's something we need to, you know, I don't wanna have a weak policy. I wanna have a good, strong policy that, so that if Jim ever has to defend us in court and he's gotta, you know, we've got a good track record, this is what we say we're doing, this is what we're doing, here's the evidence of how we went through it, and whether that winds up being controlled or uncontrolled, that's, to me, the policy question. So, I mean, that's where I think this effort needs to start. And, you know, maybe that's so what you might need to do, Danny, is if the desire is to have a sign on every, because that's different between no uncontrolled, you know, you're saying a sign, that if that's what then we need to amend that handbook or whatever we're using and put an amendment to it and say we're
Well,
gonna.
we can't amend the
Well-
handbook, it's a DOT handbook.
It's a DOT handbook, so, okay, we would have to add an addendum to it or
Or
something.
we
We
would-
can't- yeah,
Adopt
we can't
adopt
change
something.
it.
We'd have to write a policy of our own that
Yeah,
Okay,
says
so
something
that's,
different.
Yeah.
and that's
And
what I
currently
think
there
we
isn't
have to
one.
do.
right.
Right. There's
That's
no-
what I would need to have just before I would support it, because
So I
I
think
have to understand,
a motion that would be capable of succeeding would be one that, yeah, develops or figures out exactly what the policy is, where or what it's going to affect, how it's going to be in operation.
and the timing
And the timing,
to implement.
right. So, yeah, I would need to see all those things.
I don't have a problem with
In
putting a
writing
policy
before
in
it gets
place,
forward,
but again, I think if we put our own personal, or our own county policy in place, I think it'll be simple if we agreed to control all intersections. That ought to be less than a paragraph, but I'll write it up and we'll put it on next week's agenda.
Yeah, I mean, you define what
wise.
is control, what is not control, you know, cause some people say, well, it's just got a yield sign or a, you know, yield right of way. It's like, well, that's a control, right? I mean, so,
I mean, a lot of the stuff I got was vote yes on stop signs. So maybe I'm being nitpicky when I say,
Yeah.
maybe that doesn't apply to yield signs, maybe I'm not, I don't know, but that's the value of having the very specific quantified policy, I think.
I mean, I personally wouldn't have a problem on those three-way intersections having a yield sign, but I think there may be some other three-way intersections out there that may have stop signs, so we wouldn't be consistent on that. If that exists, and I'm not sure if it does or not.
Sure.
okay,
The consistency that we have now is based on applying the same DOT rules to determine whether or not we're going to
Yeah.
control an intersection. That's the consistency that we have now. It's not that some have stop signs and some don't. It's the consistency is that we look at every intersection by the same set of DOT standards to determine whether we're gonna put signage up, just as clarification.
yeah. Okay,
So, we're gonna table,
I'll put it back on next
Well,
week's.
there was no second, so technically
Yeah.
it's just not on the floor.
Yep.
okay?
but good discussion.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
that's the way to go forward.
Okay, moving forward, discussion and possible action to approve the FY 23-24 salary schedule, 3.25% adjustment to scale, and authorize one-time payments to employees at the maximum step for their grade, 0.75%.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Danny. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything else, Nancy?
I do not have anything else.
Next is receive information from county employees. Do I have any county employees that wish to address the board at this time on any issue? Seeing no one come forward. Receive comments from the public. Do I have anyone from the public that would wish to address the board at this time on any issue? Seeing no one come forward, it is 10:01, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.